bless America. Rebecca, how are you?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing well. You have some opinions about the Highway District, ACHD.
I do.
You are currently Ada County Assessor. You are running for ACHD. I have to tell you, I have driven downtown probably close to a dozen times in the last couple months to meet with the Department of Education and a bunch of other associations and meet at the Capitol a couple times. Each time, my map takes me a different route. And I'm like, I just go straight down this. And each time it's like, oh God, no. It's like a horrifying, you know what it's like?
Construction.
It's like being at Disneyland on the Indiana Jones ride where you think you're going straight. And then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, it's like you're dodging snakes and stuff. What's drawing you towards ACHD? What do you see as the problem? And why do you want to try to fix it?
Well, ACHD has strayed from its mission in the last 4 years, and especially in the last 2. So instead of trying to solve some of the congestion problems that you've encountered, they're making them worse. For example, what they want to do with State Street from 8th Street to 14th or 15th. It has 2 vehicle lanes in each direction and serves 18,000 cars a day. The commission recently voted to spend $27 million to rip it out and reduce it to 1 vehicle lane in each direction with a center turn lane and then bicycle lanes on both sides.
8 to 14th, that's like right west of downtown, right?
It's just west of the Capitol. And that's a major route for getting to the Capitol.
Okay, there's a restaurant down there that we really love, pho restaurant that we go to. My boys really like pho. My wife likes pho. There's a pho. It's not Pho Wen. It's right near Matador. It's right on it's like right on that walking street. It doesn't matter. It's super good. There's a pho place down there near Matador. Go find it, people. But the point is we go down there and we always turn on 6. So when you're talking 8 to 14th, I know that artery really well. Why reduce? Okay, look, I like bikes. I have several bicycles in my house, but I don't like bikes that replace or remove vehicle lanes. Like what was the thinking or logic that they had for that?
Well, the rationale that they used was to try to make it safer because there have been some accidents in the area. A man I know was killed in the area. He was a pedestrian crossing a street and a car ran him over. So the majority of the commission at this point seems to think that road design can change driver behavior. And it can to some extent, but you cannot design a road that prevents drivers from doing dumb things like speeding, running red lights, aggressive driving. Those are the things that we're seeing more and more of in the Valley, and it's a law enforcement issue. So the majority of the commission seems to think that if you make it difficult for cars to drive on a street, they'll stop driving. They'll ride the bus or ride a bicycle or something, but they'll go away. And that just doesn't work.
Okay, let me
and
ask
it's not the Highway District's mission to try to socially engineer people out of their cars.
Let me ask you something.
Okay.
Yeah, and like, listen, I'm an idiot. I don't hang out in city planning and stuff. I do believe that if you make it harder for people to drive, then you will have a certain portion of people that find alternate routes, right? Or alternate means of transportation, like walking, biking, bus, whatever. But you have also made it harder to drive, which you're not going to get like half of the people using alternate routes. Let's say, and again, you could correct me on this, but let's say you make it more difficult. You reduce 2 lanes down to 1. Yeah, you're going to get more people spilling out into residential areas that are not main arteries, right? Yeah, you might increase Valley Transit, a little bit, but if you're dealing with 18,000 cars and you take 1,000 of those people away, okay, great, 1,000 people, but for the other 17,000 people, they're dealing with more difficult traffic. Isn't like, am I missing something?
No, that's absolutely correct. It makes it more difficult for them to get to where they need to go. And not everybody can make a choice to ride the bus. I mean, do you think your plumber's going to show up on a bus?
I had this. So Nampa had an issue. One of the city councilmen from Nampa wanted to remove, I think it was like the Line 41 bus stops in Nampa, because they're like, listen, we're spending a considerable amount of money to maintain this line. And it turned out that I think only 10 people per day, I think they have 4,000 people annually ride the 41 that get on and get off at Nampa. So you're literally talking about 10 trips a day, and that's one-way trips, right? So like it's really between 5 and 10 people use that bus out of Nampa a day. And they're like, listen, this is not, his opinion was. So I very fortunately had a gentleman from Valley Regional Transit on. Great conversation, great guy. And he was saying, hey, look, there's a world where fewer people, like, you don't need your car for all of these different things. It's like, yeah, but a lot of the transportation I engage in is not something that I can ride a bus with. For instance, I'm going to Costco with my kids. I'm going to Costco solo. I'm not riding a bus. Like, I have a trunk load of toilet paper and, pineapples. I'm not taking a bus for that. Or if I have to take my kids specifically, if I take them down to, I don't know, the gym to go play basketball or something, like, there are not easy bus routes and we have to move quickly. So I do believe in having mass transportation or public transportation. For when I was younger, for instance, I would take the bus and I would take, BART. But now, like, that's not the population center, right? Especially if you're coming down that main corridor, you're not dealing with just college students or like, a 19-year-old. You're dealing with a corridor that's frequented by people that are not going to be able to use buses for things.
Correct. Because downtown Boise it's the seat of the state government. It's the seat of the federal government and the city government. So you have all sorts of people that need access to their representatives. Somebody who's coming, a farmer who's coming from West County or Burley or whatever, that wants to go and talk to the legislature, they're not going to ride a bus. They need to be able to go in their vehicle and get there efficiently and safely. A disabled veteran who needs services at the VA hospital, maybe coming from West Boise, maybe coming from, somewhere else in the state, they're not going to ride a bus. There is a van for disabled veterans, but it serves a limited area. And somebody coming in from outside the area is not going to know about that. So you have to have access for people, and it has to be efficient and safe. Constraining a corridor and creating congestion doesn't solve any of that. It makes it more difficult for people to get to where they need to go, and it increases driver frustration, which can increase bad behavior from drivers and increase accidents.
Right. If you're like white knuckling your steering wheel because you're late or it's taking a long time to get, what would the solution be? Right. So you're saying, hey, they're taking 2 lanes both ways down to 1 lane both ways and a bike lane.
And a center turn lane.
And they're doing this because there was a horrific, it sounds like, accident where somebody died, and that's terrible. How do you resolve this problem then? You're like, all right, look, so we got 2 lanes both ways and, cars are driving fast here. What is something that you feel like would make sense where you're like, hey, look, we're not inserting a bike lane. Like, that's not going to help. Or would the bike lane help? But what is it? What's the answer?
Well, one of the things we were doing when I was on the commission before is it's called the Low Stress Bike Network. We were looking for routes that are parallel to the arterial roadways. State Street is an arterial roadway. It's designed as a mobility corridor to move people efficiently and safely. So we were looking at routes that are parallel to the arterials and putting facilities on those parallel routes to encourage bicycles to use the safer routes where there are fewer possibility for conflicts with cars. And that's actually been done in downtown Boise. There are facilities on Jefferson and Bannock, which are parallel routes to State Street. The other piece of it has nothing to do with the highway district. The other piece of it is you've got to have law enforcement. You can set the speed limit at 35 miles an hour, and it doesn't do any good if you don't enforce it. And we're not getting enforcement. We're not getting enforcement on speed limits. We're not getting enforcement on drivers running red lights. Now, when my light turns green, I wait for the 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 cars that are going to go through the intersection.
Why aren't we getting that level of service?
Good question. I don't know the answer. I know what I've been told. Well, we don't have enough officers for enforcement. I just think, frankly, it's not a priority.
Yeah, I could see that. It's also not a popular thing, right?
True.
Having somebody sit there, like if I became a police officer, I probably wouldn't expect my day to be spent just waiting for somebody to run a red light.
Yeah. But it will impact driver behavior. You get a ticket for running a red light or speeding, you're probably going to think about not doing that the next time. If you get a second ticket, you're really going to think twice before you do it again.
Yeah. It sounds like the concept that you're talking about is a disincentivized system where it's like, oh, look, we're going to give negative feedback, right? And that negative feedback is going to draw people to find alternatives. Is there a way to incentivize them to drive more safely? Is there a way to incentivize them to use different routes so that you don't cause more congestion and then drive people like me to get frustrated that, I've been waiting an extreme amount of time and then, bicycles are going past?
Well, in order to do that, you have to make their trip easier. And in some cases, that means you add lanes for vehicles. Does every road need to be 4 or 5 lanes? No, but we do have to have a certain number of those in strategic spots so that people can get around. They're called mobility corridors. You put those in place so people can get around easily. You time the signals so that it's a smoother pathway. But they're going backwards at ACHD on roads like State Street, where you have 2 vehicle lanes in each direction. The last thing you want to do is take lanes away and make it more difficult for those drivers to get through there. 18,000 cars a day. That's a pretty heavy traffic load. They're going to go somewhere. And you don't want them to take streets where you've encouraged bicycles to go.
Right.
Because then you're creating a conflict with bicycles on the routes that you were trying to put in for them to have a safe spot.
Right. Makes perfect sense. There's a lot of talk of unincorporated development because, cities obviously have different desires to grow within city limits, and they have varying degrees of city services. And there are a lot of people, for instance, we're sitting in an unincorporated Ada County development right now, right? That's not part of an actual city. Oh. Yeah. Who knew, right?
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But.
And as such, that changes the dynamic of roadways on the periphery, right? Instead of containing everybody within cities and dealing with those areas, when people are now starting to do large developments, things that were generally thoroughfares, for instance, there's a wrangle at 55 right now because, you have a lot of cars coming out of this development and onto 55 and they don't want to put in another light. But then, we need commercial and the commercial wants lights and everything. You don't want to slow down 55. How do we start navigating that stuff and planning appropriately? Do you think ACHD is currently doing a good job with that, or do you think there's room for improvement?
Well, 55 is a state highway. So ACHD does not make decisions on the state highway. That's ITD.
Gotcha.
The one thing that ACHD can do is work with ITD and figure out where the signals should go and convince ITD to put them in. And we did that a few years ago. There was a problem on Highway 69 between Meridian and Kuna. There were people who were getting killed because they were trying to get across that. ITD did not want signals there. So we worked with them and finally convinced them that ACHD, they should allow ACHD to put the signal on the state highway. And we did. They were supposed to split the cost. They didn't, but it made it much safer. So ACHD can influence the decisions on the state highway, but they can't force ITD to do anything.
Are there any of those things that are hanging out now that need to be addressed, like larger problems?
Dry Creek, you just mentioned that's trying to turn left out of this development. It's a challenge.
Yeah.
They may have to put a light in just for safety reasons.
Yeah. They, I think they had mentioned doing like a soft left turn so that northbound 55 has a stop. Then those traveling west can turn. I mean, I don't know this stuff, but I know that they were like, it's going to be a soft stop where it's like the southbound people don't stop, but the northbound people do stop. So people traveling west can turn southbound or something. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. But the point is,
I haven't heard about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look,
concept.
Things change all the time in this development. So it's kind of like, I have no idea what's happening, which is totally fine. It's none of my affair. Yeah. You mentioned something that's really curious to me, that you felt that the current ACHD commissioners are engaging in some level of like social manipulation by trying to incentivize different means of transportation or you know, that kind of stuff. Talk to me about that.
Well, a couple of the commissioners have made it pretty clear that they would prefer people not drive their cars as much. Jim Hansen, who's retiring from the commission, I've known him for 35 years. And one of the things he wanted to do was make it more difficult for people to drive, to get them out of their cars and get them to ride the bus. And that's just not going to happen in this environment. But 2 years ago, he had 2 commissioners join the commission that shared his vision. And that's what they're trying to implement, to make it difficult for people to drive their cars.
I just don't. Sebastian Griffin, who's a city councilman down in Nampa, had really clear points on this. There's like, people are not. First off, you're so geographically removed, and he just doesn't see that. He doesn't see that level of public transportation and utilization really making a dent in cars. Like I went to school at Berkeley. I don't care for Berkeley at all, but Berkeley did have a pretty robust bus system. But you had people that, 1, didn't have cars, 2, didn't have to make it very far, and 3 were largely just carrying themselves and like some books, right? And you know, I had friends that the campus was rectangular shape, and I had friends that would literally grab the bus on one side of the long rectangle and take the bus all the way around and then like walk to their house. They didn't want to walk across campus. They're like, whatever, it doesn't matter. The bus will be here. And again, the bus stops were very, very frequent. It was like every 5 minutes, there was another bus coming around. You didn't have to go very far. You knew, you know, that was just an effective means of transportation.
It's not effective here.
Yeah, this doesn't seem like that place.
Doesn't. State Street is one of the busiest bus routes, and you might see 12 people on a bus at peak hour. It's just not utilized by people here.
That's interesting. Why has the push to make driving more difficult yielded any results as far as, like, we saw a 10% uptick in Valley Regional Transit? No. It's just become more difficult.
It's just become more difficult to drive.
Ugh. Besides all this, I have heard that there's some discussion about conflict of interest of you as the Ada County assessor, as well as, you know, running for ACHD, were you to win the ACHD spot. I don't really understand that, because as Ada County assessor, it's not like you own property and you can like steer good streets towards your properties. And, you know, like the assessor is just a role of managing individuals to determine tax rates and whatnot. So what is that? Because I don't understand, but maybe you understand and you can explain it to me.
Well, there isn't a conflict between me being the assessor and also being a highway district commissioner. Some people have tried to make it sound like there is, because they don't understand how the system works. And they say that I determine taxes, so therefore there's a conflict because ACHD collects taxes. That's not how the system works. All my office does with regard to property, we have 2 divisions. We have the appraisal division and DMV, which is a totally different topic. But all my office does is determine what the assessed value of every parcel of land in Ada County is. That's all. The assessor's office determines the value. Each of the taxing districts, and there are 40 or more taxing districts, they determine how much they want to collect in property taxes. They make that decision. You know, my opponent made a statement at a candidate forum recently that it's a conflict because I determine our budget. I'm like, no, I don't determine the district's budget at all. ACHD commissioners, just like every other taxing district, they decide how much money they want to collect in property taxes. They approve that. They submit it to the county. The county and the treasurer then look at the total assessed values and decide how that gets apportioned. They set the levy rate, and then the treasurer calculates the taxes, sends out the tax bills, collects the taxes. My office doesn't do any of that. So there isn't a conflict. I asked that question of a number of people. I talked with leadership at the legislature. Do you see a conflict here? No. Talked to Phil McGreen. Do you see a conflict? No. Some people think it's a conflict because it's a full-time job. It's actually typical for an ACHD commissioner to have another job. When I was on the commission for 16 years before, I had a full-time job because ACHD is a part-time position. It doesn't pay very much, 20-something thousand a year, which that doesn't cover gas or housing.
Right.
So it's typical for an ACHD commissioner to have another job, and usually it's a full-time job. What isn't typical is to have a job where there's a conflict. And one of the reasons I decided to run, I got phone calls from members of the legislature from both parties who were concerned about the fact that my opponent, the current commissioner, Alexis Pickering, is the executive director for the Conservation Voters of Idaho. They felt like it was a conflict and wanted somebody to run against her.
What's the Conservation Voters of Idaho?
It is an advocacy group. That's all they do, is they advocate for issues dealing with the environment and
stuff. Conservation issues.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And that's all they do. That's all the organization does. They have two arms, if you will. One is a nonprofit, and the other is a PAC, Political Action Committee, that distributes money to a lot of different candidates. They endorse candidates in races. They endorse candidates in the legislative races because they want to influence how the legislature makes the laws. So the fact that she works full-time for an advocacy group, you know, she says, well, I'm not a registered lobbyist. Well, you don't have to be a registered lobbyist to have a conflict. It's an advocacy group. Advocacy means lobbying.
Yeah, I could see that. And again, I haven't met this woman. I don't know anything about this, but I could obviously see, hey, look, if I spent 40 hours a week advocating for conservation, better environments, you know, all of these different things, I'm going to have a very specific leaning if I came to making decisions about ACHD, which might include like, hey, let's get more cars off the road.
Right.
We've talked about a bunch of things. And again, I'm a ding dong, so you have to help me. Like, are there any other big things? It's essentially, hey, look, there's a degree of social engineering and kind of making it more difficult for people to transport themselves around in their mode of transportation that they prefer, which is a car, obviously. And, you know, kind of a leaning towards that. Is there anything else that you feel like is really indicative of ACHD losing its way?
The way they're spending money. More money has been funneled away from infrastructure projects and into things like putting in bike lanes in places that in my view are not appropriate. One of the commissioners told me that 40% of their budget is going towards non-traffic issues. And that's not ACHD's mission. ACHD is a single purpose entity. Its mission is to build an infrastructure to move people and goods and services around the valley efficiently and safely. That's their whole mission. And that's where they need to be spending the money, is putting in a system that makes sense and that gets people where they need to go efficiently and safely.
What if 40% of ACHD's budget is going to non-traffic related things? Where does that money go?
Well, it's going to things like multi-use paths, bicycle lanes in places that are not appropriate. One of the things that they've tried to do is give more money to VRT, and there are limits under state law on how much money the district could potentially give to VRT. And I don't think that's an appropriate use of ACHD's dollars, because they're not the bus system. ACHD contributes to VRT already because ACHD provides the infrastructure on which the buses operate.
Yeah, that seems out there. And the cities and then riders already contribute to the system. And if the system itself is not functioning, why have the highway district it sounds like it should be exclusively focusing on easing traffic and making things better, not necessarily supporting independent systems that utilize that.
Yeah. Their mission is to provide infrastructure. That makes sense.
Not service. It's
to provide infrastructure. And we have a plan. We've had a plan in place for mobility corridors, putting in 4 and 5 lane roads where it makes sense. One of the things that I focused on as a commissioner was eliminating bottlenecks. This is long before your time here, but Franklin Road, for example, used to be, you had 2 lanes, 1 in each direction here, and then you might have 4, and then it goes back to 2, and then out to 5. Right. And so one of the things that we did was make it all the same, because Franklin Road is a parallel route to the interstate, and it's an alternative route. If there's a problem on the interstate, the traffic gets funneled onto Franklin Road and Overland. So those roads have to be constructed in a manner to move people on a daily basis, but also to handle situations where the freeway is shut down for whatever reason, like when the Cloverdale overpass was destroyed. They had to funnel people off of the freeway and onto the parallel routes. I've lost my train.
No, it's good.
Lost my train of thought.
It's good. I'm locked in because I have several instances in the last 10 years where there's been a freeway issue and everybody's spilled out. So even when you're talking about this, it's like, oh, that's what that road was, or like, oh, that's, and in some instances it worked out fine. And in other instances, it was a nightmare. Like it was like 3 hours to go a mile or something ridiculous because the entire freeway was now funneling out to these side roads. Right. And there was no forethought of like, okay, what if this shuts down? Like, how do people get, 3 miles south? And it's like, oh, they can't. They just got to wait. It's like people having heart attacks in their car. It's like, I would die.
Can you imagine what would happen if the commission decided, oh, Franklin Road should have protected bike lanes, so we're going to take out a traffic lane on each side and put in protected bike lanes, or a multi-use path, which is just bike lanes that are also a little wider so pedestrians can use them in theory. I'm not sure the pedestrians actually want to be on the same facility with bicyclists because there are conflicts on the Greenbelt, for example, with bicyclists who are going too fast and pedestrians get run over.
Yeah.
But can you imagine what would happen if...
No, anything having to do, like I got to go take my kids to basketball tonight. And it's like, I get stuck at Chinden and Eagle. And it's like backed up for like a mile. And like, I'm just trying to get the basketball practice. And it just man, it gets my heart beating. It's a little bit much for me.
So doing things like spending $27 million for that short stretch of State Street to cut the capacity in half doesn't make sense. It's a waste of taxpayer dollars, and those dollars could be used to solve real problems elsewhere. And I'll give you a good example. The 5-mile overpass over the freeway, it currently has one traffic lane in each direction, no sidewalks, no bike lanes. It's very unsafe. You could rebuild that twice with $27 million. So it makes more sense to use the funds in a place like that to eliminate a bottleneck and put in safer facilities for people who need to get across the freeway.
Well, even, I mean, look, and again, I'm a dummy. I don't know anything about this, but even just in the absence of a misappropriation of $27 million, which is more money than I'll ever have in my lifetime, probably you and me put together, right?
Yeah.
Even in the absence of that misappropriation, even if they could snap their fingers like, look, we're going to reduce State Street from, 2 lanes each way to one lane each way. And the good news is it's free because I'm like the traffic fairy. And I just snap my fingers, keep snapping. I don't know why, but I snap my fingers and boom, that happens. Even that, I'm like, no, thank you. Don't do that. And again, maybe I'm just totally misunderstanding what the nature of traffic is. But as somebody who schleps his kids around quite frequently, I would my head would explode. I don't know what I would do. And again, I've driven down there quite a lot recently, and it is not entertaining to be there, especially, oh my gosh, I was getting out from a meeting at like 4:30 and I had to jump on state to get home. And I was like, good night. It doubled. And forget it. I can't even talk about it. I freaked out. I was like, I'm not going to ever make it home. Remember me. Yeah. Anyway.
So even if it was free, it wouldn't make sense to do that.
Right. And it's not free.
It's not free.
It's not free.
And the taxpayers, we all have limited funds.
Yeah.
ACHD decided to increase property taxes this year by something like $5 million. And what are they spending it on? Things like that reduce capacity. They also spent, I don't know, a couple $100,000 on a new logo because they wanted to have branding for the highway district, which to me is ridiculous. It's not a hockey team. There was zero
not a hockey team.
There was zero benefit to the taxpayers to spend that money. They sent a big fat check to an out-of-state company in Florida to design a logo that I think kind of looks like a cartoon.
They should have sent that money to me. How much did they spend?
With getting the logo designed and then changing it on vehicles. You hear different numbers.
What's 100,000 between friends? Are we saying
somewhere between 200,000 and 500,000? And it's
for a logo.
And it's an expensive logo to use because it has 7 or 8 colors. So every time you print it, the printing cost is higher than the old.
I'm confused here. Is ACHD selling something?
No.
Do they need a Nike swoosh equivalent?
No, they do not.
Why rebrand anyway? Why do it? Was there I know, okay, look, this is the problem with our traffic right now. Our logo sucks. It's not the number of cars. It's not the number of lanes. It's not the bike lanes. It's not the VRT. It's our logo. Full send. Here's a nice $250,000. Let's solve this problem right now. Boom, we have solved the problem. Look, I don't understand agencies, right? I made my logo for the podcast on my iPad with a little pen. Anyway, whatever. Maybe as a taxpayer, I'm never going to understand this stuff, but
there was zero benefit to the taxpayers of this new logo's design. Zero.
Well, Rebecca, we're short on time. Thank you for making it in. I really appreciate understanding this because again, I've been driving downstate and what are they doing here? And man, is it already set in stone, so to speak, that it's going down to 1 lane there?
Unless there's a change on the commission.
Oh my gosh, that's gonna make things tough.
Yes, it will.
Especially in rush hour. I got this thing downtown that I was telling you about before we turned on the mics. I'm going to be going downtown a lot during the session. That would not be fun. Oh, anyway, thank you for giving me the information. I really appreciate you. I appreciate what you're doing. You've been on the commission before for a long, long time. You're running again. Fantastic. I wish you luck with your campaign.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Of course. Absolutely.